I know. You're constantly making choices about your food, what you eat, what you avoid, where you get it, and how you factor in all the noise about what's right. But I think you're missing something really critical about how the food on your plate is deeply connected to everything you care about: your health, the community, the environment, and the economy. I'm Dana DePrima, founder of the For Farmers movement and host of the One Bite is Everything podcast, now proudly a part of Heritage Radio Network. Here we are reconnecting the dots, revealing the hidden forces behind our food system and why it matters more than ever. Each week, we uncover the real impact of what's on your plate, who controls it, what's at stake, and what you can do about it. Because food is more than just what you eat. It's quite literally connected to everything you care about. New episodes drop every Thursday. Subscribe to One Bite is Everything and take your seat at the table.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. For more information, visit korin.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Matt Taylor. We'll talk to Matt about the Sonoma Coast, Napa, Matt Taylor Wines, Ink Grade, and a lot more. We'll taste a couple of wines that Matt makes for our weekly wine sip and during the show. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Matt Taylor is a third-generation Sonoma coaster hailing out of Occidental, California. Extensive world travel to Argentina, New Zealand, Spain, and France, along with learning biodynamic farming skills in Switzerland, helped him formulate his winemaking and vineyard skills, along with stints at Joseph Swan, the Arajos, Ruling, and Dujac, to mention a few. 14 years ago, Matt acquired property close to his childhood home to make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for his Matt Taylor wines at his Kohlrabi Vineyard. He is also the winemaker at Ink Grade, an historic vineyard on Howell Mountain, producing high elevation mountain-grown Cab Sauv, Merlot, and Sauvignon Blanc. Matt makes wine that honestly reflects the land and climate of the site while keeping an eye on the long-term health of the land. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Matt.
Thank you, Sam.
So was that introduction accurate? The only thing I'm not positive of that biodynamic farming thing in Switzerland.
Absolutely.
That happened?
And you pretty much nailed it.
Okay.
It's a good introduction. A lot of people put me in places I never worked at, so You did a good job.
All right. So again, welcome to the Grape Nation. We're talking to Matt face-to-face, which I always love. We are sitting here on a Saturday morning at Chambers, our friend Pascaline Lepeltier's restaurant in New York City. I know I asked you this offline, Matt, but what brings you to New York?
Doing a little market work and seeing some friends. And so did a few dinners while I was here and kind of a quick in and out and present the Ink Grade wines, Matt Taylor wines, some new things that I've never shown before for some select friends, and then off to London today.
Same stuff in London?
Same
Just
stuff in
going
London.
around,
really
talking to people?
Yeah, and really presenting the Ink Grade brand to that market for the first time.
So I kind of look at you as like a vigneron. You're really out there. You're in the cellar. Working the vineyards is important. I guess these trips are not that often.
Yeah.
But, I would say they seem hard, but it seems like your personality, it's not hard. I mean, you're not out of your comfort zone doing this, are you?
No, well, I more so the fact that for so long, decades, in fact, market work for me was just, it was an allergy, and I completely stayed away. And I was very happy being in the vineyard and the winery and at home with family. And not to say that I'm still not, but it's the opportunity and the partnership with creating Ink Grade and such has really allowed me that opportunity to get into markets, meet sommeliers, meet people, and as you're seeing, it's really opened people's eyes to the types of wines we're making now for the first time.
I think the wines speak for themselves, but I think with you standing behind them and talking
Yeah.
about it because of who you are and how you do this, I mean, that only helps. So you are a true Sonoma Coast guy.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me a little so people know where you came from, about your journey. I guess in a sense, you left Sonoma, you grew up there, you left, and then you came back, and also, you're in Napa too. Um, like I mentioned before, we'll talk more specifics about the wines and everything, but just kind of tell me about the chronology, the timeline. I'm curious because I didn't pick this up anywhere. Two things.
Yeah.
The family's not in wine.
Not at all. Doesn't drink.
Because a lot of out there's a lot of family wine. What do you mean doesn't drink? What are they, Mormons or something?
Just
that
well, my
wasn't-
mom was going to become a nun, but then met my father. But yeah, they
That
don't really
wasn't
drink
it.
at all.
And then the other thing was, I didn't pick up unless I missed it. Did you do any viticulture studies?
So, stepping back to what you started
Not
on,
that it matters. I'm just curious if you
absolutely.
did.
Well, and more so, I had to find that on my own a little bit more. So I really kind of grew up in that Sebastopol, Bodega Bay, Occidental, that little triangle out there, and very if you know the area, it's a very Bohemian culture, and so just being present in nature, multi-generational free divers, spearfisher, like being in the water, mushroom, like it was always a part of growing up and being out there, and so having a family that didn't drink, I was very fortunate that one of my best friend's family's dead. And so the Bilbro family had Marietta Cellars, and Chris Bilbro was huge. One of my biggest mentor, and Scott, Jake, Sam, all that family. Jake and I went to high school, grew up together. It was one of those things where we were always out abalone diving, mushroom hunting, pig hunting, doing something and making a meal. And then Chris was putting a bottle of Old Vine Red or some Marietta wine on the table. And for me at 13, 14 years old doing that, it was I just wanted to be Chris, and I knew at a very young age that was what I was going to do.
So that was the first and biggest
that was it.
influence.
And then but it was one of those where I excelled in sports. I went to University of Washington to play football, and I really got away from it for a moment, and then I got hurt. And then one of the things I did is I
how
went
deep into the
it was after my freshman season. This was and I really got hurt, and I tried to come back, and I really had this this moment of clarity of that I want to walk when I'm older. I want to have, and that's even a struggle
injury
now.
changed your life in
It
a good
did.
way. Yeah,
And,
I get it.
And it sent me to kind of move to Spain with some relatives and family down in Andalusia, in Cadiz, and more so go to school and really just focus on Spanish. And then that turned into, well, I'm here and I want to be in wine ultimately. And I did my first kind of winery work in Jerez, Spain. And that was kind of one of my biggest influencers in everything I do, is that side of sherry and Jerez. And then came back to the U.S. and really jumped back into it full-fledged. Yeah.
Hold on for one sec. So you're in Jerez. Do you have any idea what they're doing there? Like Jerez is like this special kind of, what you kind of knew what was going on, or
to the extent that I found a lot out when I was over there.
Okay.
But yeah, I wasn't indoctrinated into sherry growing up or what that was.
Well,
except
nobody
grandma
really
drinks
is.
sherry,
Yeah, the
but
crappy
it's-
stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
And so for me, it was no. I found out a lot, and then became enamored with a side of oxidative winemaking and oxidation, and Fino, Manzanilla. I mean, that is my kind of one of my special spots, and love that side of things. And it was something I did that, came back, and jumped right into Joseph Swan. I was hot and ready
The
to go.
mindset was, I'm coming back. I'm in wine. Let me look,
Yeah.
to further do stuff, career,
Come
all
in
that.
and really and Rod Berglund at Joseph Swan gave me an opportunity to come in, which turned into his assistant winemaker. I had no qualifications to be assistant winemaker or anything at that time, and he wound up really guiding me, him and Lynn, and and pushing me down the path and got me down to Fresno State. I was enrolled at Davis, and funny enough, I had two Davis winemakers tell me, don't go to Davis, go to Fresno. Davis was all theoretical. There was no winemaking, no winery
Less
there,
practical.
and less hands-on. And they said we need less people telling
Is
us
it
how to make
still
wine.
that to
and more
this
people
day,
that know
kind
how.
of? Or
Well, no, gosh, I want to say about a decade ago, maybe less. Davis actually has a full-fledged winery now and is producing. But yeah, went to Fresno and then wound up really, I was enamored by biodynamics at the time, still was really pushing that direction, and whole cluster. And I wound up writing Jeremy and Jock and telling them that I'd love to do some tastings. Could they help me procure some wine? And they ultimately reached out and said, listen, we take one person a year. Would you come and work with us at Dujac? And I wound up going to Dujac as kind of that
What
first
year was
push.
that?
2004. Tough vintage,
Yeah.
but you learn some of the most in those tough vintages. And so I was
Yeah.
there and then bounced back. But really it was a side of, they knew, I believe it or not, two wines that Jacques poured for me over there that surprised me, floored me, was a 1971 Ridge Islay and a 1972 Mayakama. And to be inspired by Napa while you're in Burgundy was
Wait,
just,
what was the second one?
Mayakama 1972.
The Ridge was Islay EI, what the
Yeah,
Arajos
Arajos,
had
yeah.
years ago.
And so wrote a letter to the Arajos saying, this is the path I'm on and this is where I'm at. And they created a position to manage the vineyards and work under Francoise Pichon, and went to Arajo. And then ultimately she stepped back and to consult, and I jumped into the winemaking role there and did that through the 10 vintage. And then ultimately my coastal side kept calling, and I had to go back out to the Sonoma County and be out there, and then went out and planted this vineyard.
You left something out that I came across that was also, important. It's funny how you wind up at certain places and the effects they have on you.
Yeah.
What about that Richard Loire lunch when you were?
Oh my gosh. Well, that started a chapter later on where I was on the coast, and I was starting to, the Komarevi vineyard was going, and I have another vineyard that I was planning and getting ready to go. And Ted Lemon at Literai had some Chenin planted around the corner, and he had his first vintage in barrel, and kind of went over and tasted that and was floored. And it was one of those where I've dedicated my whole life to this monarchy of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and this Chenin is absolutely flooring me. And I actually wound up getting a group together, and I wrote Pascaline, just never having met
Who
her,
hates Shannon?
and said, listen, I want to do this tasting on the coast. If I flew you out and did this and got a group of people, would you come out for a few days and do an intensive on Chenin and Cabernet Franc and really push that? And to my surprise, she said yes, and came out, and we did this, 2 days intensive, and then we had Chenin back to 1928,
Oh, boy.
and verticals of Nicolas Joly wines or Coulée de Sirène. And then basically we jumped into, she tasted the wine, said, listen, if you really love all of this, I think you and I align, you should come to the Loire with me during this week of fairs and meet producers and get into it. And
So
then
you went during the fair
I
time, not
went,
just popping around.
yeah, and then
vineyards.
her and Alice Faring and myself just went around. And of course they're like, I'm showing up to all these producers and they're like, who's this kid
Right.
with Alice and Pascaline? And that kind of
That's funny.
started it. And then she said, well, if you like that, you need to come back in the summer. And then she and I went back and did about 10 days just driving around the Loire together. And then that turned into, what about bringing Budwood back to the California coast and really starting something new? And so then we got on this mission, and it was one of those things where I thought all these producers would have this side of questioning, but no, with our relationship, they all said a happy yes. And not only that, selected the best blocks, the best vines, gave this Budwood, and then we were able to really start out on the coast, something
That's
unique
crazy.
with the Loire varietals. And the first vintage of 23 bottled those just a couple weeks ago, and I was showing those with Pascaline here that night, the Chenin and the Sauvignon Blanc.
That's crazy. I may have jumped ahead a little, but so two things I just realized. Am I pronouncing the vineyard wrong?
Komarebi. So
Komarebi.
one of the things that came up was jumping back with family.
So it's not the Jersey version. Komarebi.
you know
like
what?
11
Wherever
syllables.
it's at, it's going to be what
Okay.
it is. But
All right.
my family's best friends growing up, Japanese family that had been in the internment camps in California. And I don't know if you've ever seen this Bachan's Japanese barbecue sauce in the markets, a red and white
Oh,
label.
yeah.
That's my best friend, Justin.
There's now
And-
like 9 flavors.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they, growing up, that's what they gave out every Christmas. They'd make the
Wow.
teriyaki sauce and give it
That
to
stuff's
us.
huge and the best.
And he made it into this product nationwide. But that being said, they came out to the property, and Bachan was one of those at the time that said, you know, you have komorebi here, and what's komorebi? And the Japanese have an entire concept in a word. It's a particular form of light, and they have so many forms, and it's sunlight filtered through the leaves of trees. And so when you have these sequoia and all of these pines around this vineyard, this particular
It's
light
kind of
comes through.
sun and shade.
Absolutely,
but
with
this
fog,
interesting.
and
yeah.
it just comes through. And so that was the side of, they said that, and I said, well, I actually tried to trademark it as a name. That didn't work, so it became the vineyard name.
So that's how
Yeah,
Komorebi came.
Komorebi came about.
All right. So I jumped ahead on the Richard Loire question. You go back. You said Sonoma was calling you. You go back. Give me some dates and timelines. I mean, I stumbled on 2011, which is really when you dug into your own
That's
stuff.
dug into the ground out there. So I was 98. I was in Jerez. I went back in the end of 99, and
Swan.
I jumped into Swan end of 99, and then worked 2000, 2001, and then 2002 I went down to Fresno, came back to Swan to kind of jump in during the summer, and then 2004 went to Dujac. And then end of 4, beginning of 05 through the 10 vintage at Arajo, and then jumped back out to the coast and then started the Ruling Project. But for me,
Tell me what the Ruling Project.
Ruling Vineyard, phenomenal Chardonnay Pinot Noir. The first 100-point Chardonnay in the U.S. Marc Aubert made was from the Ruling Vineyard.
What was Aubert's thing? He was the winemaker at Ruling.
No, Aubert bought fruit from the Ruling Vineyard.
Okay. So it was
And
Aubert Ruling Vineyard.
Aubert Ruling Vineyard.
You know,
and so,
I collect his stuff. I don't remember
Yeah.
Ruling Vineyard.
Oh, and he had it all the way through 2011, and then basically they started a small brand, and we just made some incredible wines. And then I think health reasons, Tim and Jackie kind of decided to step back and just sell fruit and not continue going out in the market and such. They wanted to do what they did, and so that was Ruling Vineyard. But a important part that you and I talked about earlier that I left out here was when I was at Arajo, a phenomenal thing was that Steve Mathiasen had started a company called Premier Vit, and it was just starting, and he did a conference down in Napa that Bart Arajo and I went to, and I sat and I was just floored by what he was presenting and how he was thinking about viticulture. And I kind of really came up in a school of viticulture and enology, but really what that is it's a lot of enology and a little viticulture. And so I was just moved by Steve. And what happened was we wound up hiring him to be a consultant at Arajo, and he came in, and then Steve and I just became best friends. And I was constantly on this side of pushing viticulture and my thoughts on viticulture and how we did things at Arajo. And that really took me to step away from Arajo when I did leave. And I started a project called Front Porch Farm out in Healdsburg at the same time as Ruling. And that was something where we took 110 acre property, 50 acres on Russian River up in Healdsburg, tore that out. We did organic and biodynamic row crops, grains, vegetables, animals, olives. And so for me, it was a side of, I knew viticulture, but I didn't know agriculture, and I didn't know farming from a deeper perspective like Steve did. And it was something I was always envious that.
But you knew then to understand all of this would make you a better.
Well, and that was the side,
understand the
yeah,
earth.
I mean, I know that you'll ask that side of like those wines that were the aha moments, right? But all of those wines stem back from, and in 98, I lived with family in Switzerland, and biodynamics was a thing. And I had no idea at that time, but again, growing up in a bohemian area, I was always very supportive of these types of ideas, and biodynamics came in. And so when I'm sitting there and kind of pushing these spectrums, it was all back to a side of farming and wanting a deeper understanding of farming, not just viticulture. And so that was the big push at Front Porch, and I got that.
Who was
in
behind
Mass.
Front Porch?
Who
was funding all this and kind of overseeing it?
Yeah, so Peter and Mimi Buckley, they had started with Doug Tompkins, who started the North Face, Esprit. If you remember that old clothing line, Esprit, they
Sure.
had sold Esprit, and they were still, Yves Chenard, Doug Tompkins, Peter Buckley. There's a group of friends of them that would always travel around the world and do these trips. And so Peter, like Doug Tompkins, did this in Patagonia with all of
Crazy.
his farming. Peter did this kind of wanting to come back to the land and start a project like that. And I was getting heavy into distilling. I was with Hubert Germain Robin, and we had bought an old 19th century cognac still, and we were getting that ready and developing recipes. So like I went heavy in the farming and distillation and even wine side still, but that really influenced farming to a deeper level for me.
So what happens after that?
So after that, I wind up realizing that unfortunately the side of there was that they were very much moved about the row cropping and farming, and I was loving participating, but I'm not a row cropper.
Right.
I love that side and learning what that was, but that wasn't my daily grind. And so winemaking was still the calling. And so I really pushed that further, and I wound up jumping into a project called Chamboulet, which had a gentleman, Mel Pearl and Francois Morissette. You might have had the Pearl Morissette wines in Niagara.
Yes.
Yeah, so
I've heard of
they were jumping into California, and I jumped and partnered with them on that. And that was a huge opening for me, because so much of my career had been, and as many California winemakers are, it's a very modern version of modern winemaking, more reductive in style, let's say. So you think of that side of keeping oxygen off. Let's just say
Right.
that for simplicity. And I jumped into somebody who really had time at Meunier, Rouleau, and Old Hat, some of these masters, liquid mentors. And so I was able to really spend time pushing an envelope and a side in winemaking that I hadn't been able to push prior. And it really got me into the vein of truly this project and everything I'd been wanting to do my entire career. So that was the biggest eye-opening from a winemaking side. And then all the farming that I had prior, it was all
So when was that?
Summing
And
up.
when do you start your own thing? Where are we at?
So I had started the vineyard, and I was doing this project.
Are we up to around 2011?
Yeah, so 2010 through 2014, I was doing Front Porch, I was doing Ruling, and I was doing this out in Occidental and getting
Wow.
it going.
Running around.
And then I wrapped those up and did Chamboulet full tilt with them out on all Occidental coastal stuff, and then some fun Coombsville, 100% whole cluster, Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon
Cooler
type stuff.
climate stuff. Right?
Yeah, and 100% whole cluster stuff that was phenomenal, and it was pushing all of these norms and sides that I wasn't on my own dime necessarily allowed to push, and getting that experience into those, and so I got those pushed. And then what happened was Chamboulet was kind of 14 through 18, 19. And then what happened at that time was I met Carlton, and that was
He was just starting to get going.
yeah. And
So
I really,
that's when Ink Raid came on the
and that was
table.
the calling. And I had no desire to go back to Napa. And that was the side of, listen, we both love the same style. And when you have a master som, not just an owner or investor who doesn't necessarily trust their own palate, a master som who really knows
Yeah.
the history and can
more
really
evolved.
can say, like, we love the same style and we want to be on the same wavelength and do the same exact thing. Let's do this from a 35-year-old Howell Mountain vineyard. And I went back to Napa, and the side of that agreement was as well, I was able to make my wines over there, and they helped me sell my wines domestically and internationally.
Also on the farming side, I mean, their sensibilities are,
Incredible.
not that they're big,
Yeah.
but they're a little group,
They are
for
big
them to be
for a family
committed to
owned.
thoughtful
Yeah.
farming and all that.
And then-
Galen and Carlton and all
And
that.
farming all of that acreage biodynamically, largest certified biodynamic ranch in Napa, Ink Grade is. And so you
Well,
have,
We'll talk about that
Yeah.
a little
But-
later on.
I come back to that side. In that time frame was I was going to the Loire with Pascaline, and Richard Loire was a huge influence on me. And I had never been brought down the realm of producing a wine without sulfur. No desire necessarily. I wanted really very beautiful wines, but I didn't see that possibility to do that without taking a huge risk. And Richard was basically took me into his bosom, if you will, and sat down and he opened all of these vintages prior to '09, and then '09 through '11 he had sulfur non-sulfur, and then '11 100% switched to non-sulfur, and he had all these wines that he was showing me. And this side of, listen, this is my process and what I had to go through and where I'm at. And you saw these wines age and the ageability without versus with. And then he just said, listen, I'm not telling you what to do, but you have, and I had the first vintage of Chardonnay on the property there. And he said, listen, you have everything in this wine to do the path of without. You have to make that call on your own, but it was really
So he
that
was
inspiration,
validating that it had the bones,
everything to do that.
but he understood, and I guess a lot of why it has the bones is he understood the type of farming and everything you were doing.
100%.
I mean, that plays into,
Yeah.
you know, why you don't need to treat sulfur or whatever.
And that's and why the Loire was so special. I mean, I was indoctrinated with probably the foremost authority and person that could present me to anybody over there with Pascaline.
Yeah.
But you also had a side of I worked in Burgundy, and I think one of the difficulties in these areas is they've gotten so much acclaim. You meet with suits, not vigneron. And the thing about the Loire, everywhere you go, the people that you're meeting are doing all of the farming, all of the winemaking, and it's the real deal.
Well,
And that to me is
That's
just
kind of who you are. you
Yeah.
know? I mean, it's not like you're replicating it. That's the way it's done, and that's
Yeah.
the way you want to and have to do it.
absolutely.
So we're pretty much up to date, right? You know, you
Sure.
started in grad, you got your thing going. We'll talk a little further, about the developments and all of that. But I said to you, I wanted to ask you some other specific questions. And I'm interested from a guy like you. I'm currently consumed with this question, okay? And the question is, have you thought about how the Trump tariffs, if implemented or imposed, will affect you and the wine circle around you, which is your importer or distributor? You have restaurants, retailers that are
Yeah.
friends. Here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, do you not think about it? Because why? Do you think it'll have an effect? What's your take on that?
Well, what I'll say is that if you know me, you know that my worst attribute is selling wine. I'm happy to be out there, and I think I connect well, but at the same time, I am never good about that kind of point of sale or do anything because I'm very
I
happy.
think you're
in the
selling
vineyard.
yourself short. I think it's more of a desire to not want to do it than the ability to be able to do it.
Maybe,
I'm telling you that.
but
You're not this shy, uninformed.
well, you had Carlton on the podcast, and if there's somebody
He's
that
shyer
is
than
like,
you.
is like up to date and getting into the information and knows.
He's more
I'm-
restrained than you. Your personality is more,
Uh,
I wouldn't say boisterous or type A, but it's
yeah,
there.
well, that's
And this is
that's
not a
kind
knock
of
on
you.
Carlton. He's like this chill, mellow dude.
Absolutely. Well, for me, it's a side of I'm learning more, and I'm definitely hearing from friends more now that I'm out in the industry
Right.
more. I hear more, and I'm talking about. And Eric posed a very similar question, and it was one of those where, I'm a little bit negligent in the side of I know the effect, I know where it's coming from, but I'm not. I'm probably I did not get the business genetic like my brother did. I am the 100% nature influenced in the vineyard winemaker type guy. So I'm learning more, but I'm not the authority
So
to be
it's not
talking
this
about it.
overhanging cloud or fear. It's there. We're
Yeah.
not sure what's going to happen.
There's always
there's
cycles
no
and
battening
waves.
down the hatches because
Yeah.
what for what or how?
Just like agriculture, we're going in and out of waves.
I want to check back with you on that because I'm just curious because you have two exposures. You have your winery and
Yeah.
you're part of a well-run group and all of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you're a young dude, but you've been around a while, and we just discussed, where you got your chops at a lot of different places and everything. There's like this new California wine thing,
Mhm.
which wasn't yesterday or a year ago. But do you feel like you're part of that? I mean, do you think, Matt Taylor Wines is kind of a new California wine? And if you do, what is new California? I mean, how do we even define that? I mean, do you buy into that? There's definitely a movement beyond what we knew for many years before.
I mean, I feel like, you spoke of Raj. I feel like there was a big push in that time frame of In Pursuit of Balance and what that was. And that, I mean, Bonet wrote, New California Wine. That was a whole time
Yeah,
frame then. And I felt like, yeah, for me, there was a necessity to deconstruct where I was at and what I was doing. And I mentioned that Chamboulet project and the side of, I very much came from a modern winemaking side, and I was pushing some envelopes, but nowhere near to the tilt of what I needed to do and have instruction with.
right.
And so for me, I feel like these wines are, when I think of the future of, we talked about consumers and where younger generations going, the authenticity of farming is becoming more and more prevalent. And you see bigger corporations now shifting the marketing to more about into the farming and where they're changing things farming wise. And everybody's going to jump on a bandwagon to help sales, but hence going to the Loire, that authenticity and farming side is very, very big. And I think that the producers and the ones out there that are doing that full gamut and what that is. And for me, it was always being at the same level as the liquid mentors that moved me, the Thierry Almans, the Edmond Vatans, the Foucaults, the Literature Lois, the wines that at their highest level, I don't think there's anything better in the world. And so it wasn't about being trendy or about, it just was
No, I didn't
following
mean
a
it.
side.
I think it's a good torch. It's
Yeah.
not like, are you part of that trendy
Yeah.
torch? It's sort of like, thank God there's been this movement, and John did document
Yeah.
it well, Benet. But
But it's also my difficulty with labeling a wine, for me, natural, in the sense that natural has so many different avenues of which you can be down, and these wines are made naturally. But I don't think of, nor do we think of Thierry Almans wines as natural. Do we think of these wines over there? It's very much a very heavy US dose of us needing to separate ourselves from corporate winemaking,
yeah,
and a younger generation finding a backing.
that's a good point.
And for me, it's a side of, I have a difficulty with that, because yes, these are, but these are not made to be, again, part of a trend. They're just made to be the highest level from where
Right.
they're at, and they are an anomaly to what's being done on the Sonoma coast. The style of Pinot and Chard is not what everybody else is doing, and it's not about that. It's about how I see these properties in my winemaking coming through in the viticulture to express the property of the most sensibilities of me.
I've been doing the show long enough that natural wines was kind of not at its infancy. It had been around, and it started growing in New York with cheerleaders like Pascaline and many other people and all that. And it's so silly now. I would ask people to define it. It doesn't need a definition, and I don't care about it. I now call it, like, I don't even call it low intervention. I just call it thoughtful winemaking.
Yeah.
Because what goes into thoughtful
Yeah.
winemaking is open, but people who know how to do it right do it right. We got to take a quick break, but I think what I want to do before we take a quick break is pour a little of that ink grade, and it's an opportunity to talk about the wine. Wow, that's a deep color, man. It's like almost purple.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the wine.
Yeah.
So what we have here is, you had 2019 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. And this wine is really, really special to me, because 2019 was really the first year that we started taking back contracts from growers. And I mentioned Joe Heights planted this vineyard in 1990. He sold the fruit for over 3 decades, because this is mountain phenolic structured fruit. Heights is a valley floor brand. And they brought a little in every year to basically blend into Heights wines, but otherwise he sold the fruit. So Dunn, Cade, Odette, they were all buying this fruit for their Howell Mountain and Napa Valley portions. And so this was something we took back a contract on, and you have something here that is 88% Cabernet Sauvignon, 12% Howell Mountain Merlot declassed into it. But for me, like take a step back. Those 70s, like what I was so inspired by and what Carlton and I kind of talked about and agreed on was we wanted wines that had that natural acidity, that had a little bit lower alcohol, but that had that power and intensity and freshness. And where oak wasn't the aromatic component, it was a nuance within that, but you still had the tension from very good coopers in that. So this wine is very much that. Stylistically, it really shows the pathway of where we're going. There's a freshness, there's a brightness, there's a crunchiness, but there's Cabernet Sauvignon aromatics. There's even there's an herbaceous side that comes in there from the Cabernet, what Cabernet is. And so for me, you get a side here of, I really appreciated the fact that the Spectator put this in the top 100, because for me, stylistically, I didn't think that this was going to be up their wheelhouse and what they jam on. And the fact that it was celebrated only showed the quality of it and where it was at. So, yeah.
This is a question of my gullibility. Mountain grown grapes, I know, are more intense, all that stuff. But is there a better opportunity for acidity and other things because they're mountain grown, or that's something, that you do in the growing and picking and all of that?
It's funny. I talk about how I really see ourselves, Napa especially, as acid farmers, and that's a side of. I was blessed on this property because of Joe Heights and Mark Neal. This property was planted, mid 90s. David Abreu really came in, and you see a huge push with VSP trellising. And what that is, those hedgerows that you see in Napa that are so perfectly,
right.
That's VSP. So very straight up and tucked in all the canes, and you get a very big exposure to sunlight, and you had this ripeness and this bigger red fruit component come in, and you have this side of where Napa wines really shifted with that. It's too warm of a climate for VSP. This is what I use out on the Sonoma Coast with Pinot
you're
and
stuck
Chard.
with that big style
For sure. And so what happened though in the 90s when Joe planted this vineyard to get it in before the Hillside Ordinance on the side of a mountain, this is all California sprawl. So you just have Geneva Double Curtain, Lyre, Elkhorn. You have these massive rows with these bigger canopies, and what happens with that is we have, phenomenally enough for ourselves, there's a preservation of acidity within those grapes. And I also love the fact that so many vineyards you see in Napa are just, blocks, if you will, like truly block, rectangular or blocks.
Yeah.
And hence why they're called blocks. But they just have this side of straight rows, and everything in 8th grade is just on the side of a mountain. So it is terraced and just winding, and you have curvature, the complexity of everything. Acid, sugars that comes from something being a west facing versus an east facing versus north versus south. It's just everything
All
has a difference in that, and there's a complexity there that makes it even more special.
What's ironic, the irony is when talking about new California wine and winemakers, the new guys or the guys that are deemed part of that are doing all the old shit. It's sort of like those beautiful
Always.
rows, they ain't working.
Absolutely.
The beautiful in between where it's clean, that's how cover crops and all that stuff.
Efficiency is great to a point.
All right, so let's sample the wine. So we look at the color, and it's a deep dark brooding wine for sure, but not there's some translucence to it in a good way. Throw it up to the schnoz and tell me what you get on the
well, closed at the moment, coming out. I'm getting some wonderful floral notes that are coming through on it. I'm getting some darker red side fruits that are coming through, as well as some like more bluish fruits. I'm not getting into the raisiny dark purple.
No.
If anything, that would be way on the back as a nuance. I'm even getting a little bit of like bay laurel, and something that's coming through as a slightly herbaceous note. But
the
again,
savory herbaceous.
Yeah, and I talked
which is
to people,
not just the vintage; it's the grape and that site and all that, right?
And one of the
sometimes
things,
you get a green peppery vintage because of the vintage. There's
this property
savory note.
It passes that, but there's so much bay laurel, manzanita, madrone, and everything growing up there. It gets into the skins, and bay laurel is a note of this property. But what I'll say is that
You
all
love
the
skins.
wines. Oh, I love skins. But one of the things I'll talk about is the side of all the wines that you're going to try from me. I always think of them as this long arc or rainbow, if you will, or a very flattened rainbow. versus most of the wines that are coming in, they just have this triangularity. So they really hit you with a push of aromatics. That's that reductive modern
It's even opening
winemaking.
in the last few minutes.
That modern winemaking pushes all that to the forefront, whereas these wines in that oxidative style and the way you're doing it, it's much more about complexity and nuance and finding this and that, and it always changing.
All right, so let's throw it over the uvula and see. I want to get the mouthfeel first.
I haven't used uvula in a while.
So the beautiful thing is, it's got that right middle mouthfeel. You know, it's not this unctuous, overblown Napa. It's hardly a thin wine. It's a real, medium, but you get hit. Now let's talk about the palate. You get hit.
Mm-hmm.
Do the palate descriptors replicate a lot of the nose descriptors that you mentioned?
Well, what's wonderful is that one of the things that and I think that for me, aromatically, and I do, but I don't think necessarily always people draw a line between the two, is that acidity profile and where the acid comes on. And to me, that's one of the most special things, because
Yes, it's
we're
great.
probably one of a couple handfuls of producers in the valley that aren't getting acid in our Cabernets by dumping tartaric acid in the fermenter. This is from farming, natural acidity.
I would
and there's-
expect that from you.
And
at
there's
this
a
point.
complexity to that. That is not just coming from tartaric acid.
So, not to take any shot, and I'm not even bringing it up there. I had Chris Carpenter on less than a year
Mm-hmm.
ago, and he basically works on, mountain grown wines. Now, I don't know how he coaxes the vines or farms and all of that,
Mhm.
but he's starting in the mountains, and that ain't a bad start. So this is the 2019
2019 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon.
Are you sure?
Oh, we are drinking the 20.
Are you
This is
sure?
what they had down there. Pascaline surprised me.
You bastard.
So
So
one of the things about this is even more special in the sense that, okay, so this is not available on the market.
Okay.
19 is what we're pouring right now. And what's so
Is
nice,
2020 not there yet?
it's not in the market
Okay,
yet.
so the
yeah.
current ink grade vintage.
But there's a
just for you guys
similarity
is
between
2000.
the two. I think the difference between the two for sure is that, and this is a great story, in that Carlton, I called Carlton. We had fires in 2020, and I was standing.
Oh, yeah, I
out.
forgot.
I don't know if you want to come back to this after the break or.
No, finish that story.
Okay, so I was up on the hillside. We had the fires. There was 5 fires I could see from the property, ink grade property, and basically there was this campfire smell down at about 900 feet. And I went up and down the mountain, and I basically called Carlton at 1:32 in the morning and said, "Listen, boss, I think we need to pick everything tonight." And
Was that within a fair window? You weren't going.
well, we had a long discussion, and the discussion was, well, whatever you're going to grab, make sure it's ready. And we brought in 7 crews, and we picked 90 tons that night. We got about 70% of it off. We had to sneak 30% off the mountain because we got evacuated from the property. We never got back on,
Wow.
and had to declare insurance on the rest of the property. So we basically made a Napa and a Howell Mountain Cab, and these wines are labeled 13.5. They are let's say quite a bit lower in alcohol than what is on the label on these ones
Because of the early pick.
because of the early pick. But as if there's a side of just absolute barometer to set for myself on what this property can be, doing it at this early level, this was it. And the wine is just this will be probably one of the longest aged wines I've ever make or will make. This is going to outlive me and my children.
Why did it require longer aging? Was it because of the early pick? Or
Well, the early pick, and then the side of working with those phenolics, those tannins, and then in the tanks that I was in a custom
so
crush.
multiple reasons.
I got kicked out. So the Elevage was about 4 years on this in large cask. Surly its entire life, no sulfur, salt sulfur right before bottling. But these wines, this acid, this is going to go, I'm hoping a century. This wine has all the components to outlive me and go into my kids' life.
You're probably right. Zero detection of smoke, right? I mean, you're
This
the
was
expert.
before the smoke. So
Right.
we guarantee that this was
I mean,
before
it
any
was
smoke.
around, but it came nowhere near you.
It
Or
had just started.
right, you
and
said
it
there
was
was a campfire smell, a little lower
lower
elevation.
on the property, and then as the days sat in, it just started to blanket and cover Napa Valley.
That's interesting. I forgot about 2020. um, I hate when you go to a steakhouse and the Somm is, he's also the runner and he recommends a 2020 from, I mean, Schaefer Hillside didn't even bottle that year.
Yeah.
They got killed.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, we got to take a quick break. We just tasted and evaluated the
Smell it again, by the
2020 Ink Grade. You have one meal to pair with this. What's the ideal pairing?
It's such a baby. I mean, you really need something to cut through it right now with the acid and where the tannins are at. But
So that's not a bloody steak necessarily, or it
you
could
know
be.
what? I mean, because of the acid on it, it would take quite a bit more. But I would even take it last night. We had a duck ragu pasta that this would even hit well with, and
That's a good one.
It went really well.
Just kind of opening the idea. There's pasta there, which
There's a
with
little
the
fat.
sauce on is rich. The duck is rich.
Yeah.
All that.
Yeah.
That's a good one. All right, Matt. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more about Ink Grade down the road. But when we come back, I want to talk about your wines and everything that goes into it. We're talking to Matt Taylor from Matt Taylor Wines and Ink Grade. Matt Taylor Wines is on the Sonoma Coast. Ink Grade's in Napa. When we come back, like I said, we'll talk about his project first. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. Korin is proud of their Japanese culture and traditions, but they want you to know that their products are not just for Japanese restaurants. Their knives and tableware bring out the best qualities of food from every culture and fit into every restaurant from French to Pan-Asian to American. And that is why they're located in New York City, where people from every country in the world come to eat. Korin's Tribeca showroom is home to the most extensive collection of Japanese chef knives in the world, including Japan. Stop by to view their exquisitely designed tableware and the rarest natural sharpening stones. They have a whole range of knife services from repair and rust removal to reshaping and realigning. Korin is dedicated to this ideal, bringing the highest quality Japanese design to your table so you can experience the unparalleled quality of Japanese craftsmanship in your home or restaurant. For more information, visit Korin.com.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Matt Taylor. You mentioned something earlier that's kind of one of my questions. It sounded like you knew you wanted to go back to the Sonoma Coast to make wines. Was it just obvious to come back? I mean, was it more than home? Just you realized after all the experience of doing the wine stuff that was kind of the setup that you wanted? Was it that deep, or?
I mean, I'm born and raised, and so for me,
That's one part of it.
Napa Valley was something where I felt like I needed the education and I needed that side of farming and what Araujo provided. But truly, my calling was back out to where I was born and raised, and so yeah, it was definitely a side of it. It had always been calling, and I needed to head back out there.
That's part of the answer. What else I was getting at was you were pretty aware that what was going on out there was a place that was interesting to grow the wines that you wanted to, or you weren't even sure where you were at with that?
What I will say is that a lot of the wines that, of course, hit me and that were inspiring were some things being created out there on the coast. I mean, I was
like Ted Lemon stuff.
Yeah, Aaron Jordan in the Syrah up at his property up there.
Yep.
What Ted was doing, the Pays especially,
Right.
Andy and Nick and Vanessa and what they were doing out there. And so there was just things that were inspiring. And for me, it was something where what you're going to taste and what you're going to get into, what I wanted to do whole cluster wise was just not possible. And I say what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to take all those ideals that Steve and I were talking about and the things that were difficult to do in Napa on some of these properties. I wanted to be able to do that out on the coast. And what those are, farm them organically and biodynamically, non-cultivated, and dry farm them out there. And I wanted to be able to do that with whole cluster. And when I say whole cluster, there's a bigger component to that, because making wines whole cluster, you have to have an inherent natural acid starting point because of what potassium uptakes and what you're going to get losing acid in that fermentation process and what happens with that. So if you are not starting with a low enough acid, those get into a place where, again, you're going to have to acidulate those wines to get them back. And the last thing I want to do on any of this is have to do that. And so the Sonoma Coast, for these varieties that it's a very special place to be able to do this. And I come back, I mean, we can talk skins and why that is, because
we will. But one of the things you didn't mention, you mentioned a lot of things. The climate and the soils kind of were ideal for that whole thing you discussed.
Yeah.
You weren't fighting against them. They were, they were working well enough for you in that sense.
In climate, I think, especially in the sense, and I was going to get to the side of this property out on the coast, for me, from bud break to harvest, you're in that average of about 220 days. And when I think of Incgrade as a Cabernet Napa project, from bud break to harvest, I'm about 180 to 190 days. So there's a full month of farming or plus that goes into being out there on the coast.
Yeah. It's a pretty big difference. I saw you mention something. It kind of sums up, what's out there, what you're doing. You call that area, and tell me if I'm right on this, a rugged margin spot. Do you know it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, there's I think some of the greatest wines in the world, the reason that they're the greatest wines in the world is that they ride a place in the world that is the kind of bordering on the level of tension. And even that side of, for example, like think of Duncan and Nathan Arnott Roberts, their Quai Syrah vineyard. I think it's one of the most fantastic, fabulous Syrahs in the world when it ripens. And so you have a side of it rides that level of tension and out on that line. And when you put things on those limits, that rugged margin area, you really
sounds like the most interesting.
It is. And so I think that this is a property that rides that margin, that level of tension that you don't get in a lot of places of the world.
Are we talking Komorebi Vineyard?
Yeah. Oh, and we're talking.
You feel you're on that
and how
margin
this
where
property,
that's so beneficial to what you want to do.
Exactly.
Let's get specific and let's talk about the wines and the vineyards. You talked a little about farming practices, but go through everything. You do dry farming.
Mm-hmm.
What is the benefit of dry farming? It creates more intense grapes or tension. What?
Well, I mean,
is it an environmental thing too?
I think that there's all types of dry farming. So we can't just blanket statement, because I remember
all kinds of natural foods.
When I was coming up, I met with the guys at Frogs Leap, and Frank Lee's a great farmer, but his style of dry farming was the side of he was just constantly cultivating the soil and bringing this side of water up. And this is a side of not only dry farming, but doing it with non-cultivated soil. So permaculture and regenerative farming out there. But for me, I always talk about how it was a big component of what we wanted to do. I felt like I almost killed a couple vineyards at Araujo, or blocks, I should say. And it's one of those things where, this is an area where we're pushing that side of farming and able to do so because, again, it was planted in 11. We didn't graft till 14. So we really pushed rootstock deeper and deeper before we grafted. I should have had a first vintage in 15.
Is that the rootstock goes deeper because of dry farming, because it reaches?
Yeah. So initially there's some irrigation, just to keep them alive, and keep them up.
But at some point you want the vines to...
and then, but without having the load of starting to get into what we're forcing upon them, just allowing that rootstock and that top canopy of rootstock, we really pushed rootstock deeper into the soil. And so it had a starting base ahead of the curve, if you will, to jump into it. But I think, again, with climate and where things are going, the necessity to get away from the dependency on irrigation is ever more important. And that knowledge of how to move vineyards and wines to dry farming is becoming a little bit of a lost art. So I kind of on that side of we need to get more people adapting to this.
Well, part of that is by example. Part of that is by evangelizing. It doesn't happen overnight, and that area may not be the easiest.
Yeah.
You're doing high density planting.
Yeah.
What I mean, high density is what it sounds like. There's more vines
Yeah.
per,
So this is
acre.
this vineyard is 4 feet between rows and 3 feet between vines, so meter by meter too. And
Just for perspective,
Mhm.
what's a less dense vineyard?
So I think a lot of California, typical, let's say VSP, the stuff that we're talking about, you're looking at about 1,800 vines per acre, more or less in that
Okay.
range, right? Maybe around 1,200 on the California sprawl. These vineyards are about 3,600 vines per acre,
Wow.
so double that. And
What
putting
does the high density planting, bring to you as far as your goals?
Yeah.
How you
multifaceted. I think
Is
that
it-
it's number one, it's not economically sensible to plant high density it costs more to farm this
it
direction.
sounds like it would be, but it's not.
It is more, and yet at the same time there's a little higher yield out of it. But what I will say is that a great analogy is when you think of a vine and you think of it as being a mother vine and holding all of these babies on it, these clusters. A vine on this property is going to hold about 15, 16, 17, 18 clusters.
Okay.
And when you're talking about the typical 1,800 vines per acre, you're looking at vines that are holding maybe, let's say, 40 clusters.
Oh, wow.
And such. And so you're looking at something that is the amount that's concentrated per vine on a lesser amount of fruit is substantial. You have a natural competition amongst the root profile in there. But for me, I think one of the biggest things is, again, coming back to skin maturity. It's insanely more mature, and what I mean by that is when I get to harvest out there, and length of season is a part of that as well, but when I'm getting these skins down near harvest, they are almost at that point of disintegration.
I read that.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a physical thing? Like during harvest, if you mishandle it, are they that delicate, or we're not talking exactly that?
Not that delicate, but like when I put them in and you give them a little bit of grinding with the molars and then you put them out in your thing, they will just basically break down like sand and then stain and get to that point. And what's so important about that is that when you bring a whole cluster wine in like that, you think about what I'm doing and trying to get lees. Lees is all of my antioxidants and everything I'm
Do you
trying
get
to
to
do.
the lees quicker, or do they
You-
dissolve? Or
You get more quality lees from that fermentation and what comes down in that, more solids. But you also get a side of, when I think of whole cluster, what comes out, the phenolics that are available truly all come out in this. But when I think of, like, when you dig out one of our tanks at the end of harvest, you have solids and skins and you have stems. And I think on Instagram, when you see people start to pull whole cluster and they're digging out a tank and you have basically a cluster that the berries have gone white and they're all still sticking to the cluster.
Oh.
That's a side of those. There's more carbonic in that, whole different side. So this is a very select, like this property is farmed for this type of winemaking.
So while we're on the vineyard and we're talking Matt Taylor wines, you're predominantly, or you are working with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir,
Correct.
right?
On this property, yeah.
How big is the property?
It's an 8-acre property, about 6.5 planted.
And how is it dedicated as far as how much white, how much red?
Very little white. In the
So
future,
you're making more Pinot.
Yeah, in the future, I'd love to do more white, but it's about, let's say, 95% Pinot, 5% Chardonnay.
Oh my God, I didn't realize.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more Chardonnay, but it's very predominantly Pinot Noir.
So I hate to even, bring this up, and I don't even know to be the case, but it sounds like to me that the Chards are like fucking unicorns. I mean, but just because if everyone's listening, they're like, holy cow, this guy's got it together. These are interesting wines. He's not making a lot. They're thoughtful. It's pretty cool to have one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a compliment.
That's nice.
You don't
Thank you.
have to react to that, but that's,
We don't make a lot.
and that's a tough thing because you want everyone to enjoy it, but you don't have the
100%.
facility and all that. So you're working with those two varietals. We'll get to the specific wines in a minute. I want to talk to you about in the cellar for a second. Let's jump from the vineyard to to the cellar.
I'm glad you spent so much time on the vineyard, though. That's awesome.
Well, that's my favorite thing. Now.
Yeah.
Anybody will tell you that any good wine is made in the, the vineyards and all that. But I think we've talked about this a little, but maybe you could tie it together. Did you always have a style in mind of the kind of wine you wanted to make? Or did that evolve, or you make the wine that you're dealt, the climate, the soil, all of that stuff? I mean, can you answer
yes
that
and no.
question?
Yes, I had a style. Let's just say that, I mean, for Pinot Noir, I was very much influenced by, let's say, Domaine du Jacques and then whole cluster Pinot Noir. That evolved in the sense that I found a lot more similarity to Grenache with Pinot Noir in California than to Burgundy with Pinot Noir. There's a sun-kissed side of fruit in California that Burgundy doesn't get. And there's a sweetness to the fruit that comes through that's more reminiscent to me of Grenache than to Pinot Noir. Chardonnay was something that I was much more inspired by the wines of Lavey and Ganavat and Jura, and getting into let's say more even Chablis and the sides that come down into Chenin and those type of white wines that for me, I saw the wines I love drinking more reductive Burgundian style Chardonnay. I love that side.
So those wines are more reductive than oxidative. I always get that confused.
Okay. Yes, and there's very much a side of a more of a sulfur regimen to making those wines. And the wines that I was inspired by for this small production Chardonnay, let's just start there, was more of an oxidative push toward them. And I started off on that path and they've stayed on that path and they always will, but I'm not opposed to this other, but for this property and what I'm doing out here, it's very much pushed down this vein, more Jura-esque.
Right. So we talked about whole cluster, which is definitely a style and a feature that you're working with. What about things like, are you doing anything else in the cellar? I mean, we'll get to vessels in a second, but I mean, just temperature,
100%. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in there.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things not to manipulate, but to manage.
Yeah. And I think that, and Pascaline and I were talking about this the other day, that side of, and she's, in her push with a new book that she's writing, but very much a side of, she's wanting to think of like deconstructing so that people can get back to that side of listening to nature, if you will, getting out of just the hustle and bustle and being able to be within yourself and listen more. And I think that side of, growing up in a very bohemian coastal nature side of things, probably a lot of pot out in that area as well, has a side of
still that way.
Very much so. But that side of listening. And I think that for me, I've also made a lot of mistakes on the way that have shaped a lot of the things that we do. So these grapes come in, Pinot Noir, they're going into tank, but I had a Pied de Cuve that I've picked 7 days earlier that started, and it's the day of those are going into tank. I'm basically getting into that tank and I'm body treading it because it's 100% whole cluster.
No, Pied de Cuve is juice that you're going to use.
It's grapes that I brought in. I have a mini ferment going that's about 7 days old. And the reason being is that I find that about 7 days, you get to about a density of about 1,000, specific gravity of about 1,000-ish. And that's the peak Saccharomyces population time frame. And so when I do that, I have that on the side made. I'm doing this body tread. I put that in the tank, and that evening, it's already forming a cap. And so it's immediate. There's no lag phase, and all of those microbial challenges that I might have really started to be eliminated because Saccharomyces is now the predominant thing, not everything else that can get a foothold. And so those get started, and I love warmer temperature. I'm a structural guy. So my things like I want them to heat up and get to an extent. If they get to a point, I'll turn on cooling, but otherwise I want them to heat. I want them to go. I want structure. And then these Pinots are going all the way through. I'm building them. And that's a vintage thing. It changes every vintage and how structure's coming out. And it's like 17 we can go in. We're going to taste this a total anomaly to what I typically do. But they get to that point, and now you're taking these wines and you're now macerating them because I built so much structure. I need to polish that out. And so these will be in tank from start to finish for 30 to 40 days for Pinot Noir. And then those are getting pressed off, and then you're keeping all of that great lees and you're going into larger vessel. So for me, I maybe can't afford casks like Foudre Botti style. So these are 600 liter Demi-Muit. And the difference is when you go from 60 gallon, 500 liter, those are all 27 millimeter in wood. You're now jumping up to 45, 44 millimeters of wood. And that rate of oxidation is much slower.
Really?
And so you're getting into wood that's a slower rate, but it's surely their entire life. And these are about 2 years ish, maybe longer, maybe less, depending on the year, about 2 years just in barrel. And they never see anything until low sulfurate bottling. And I just don't feel comfortable with these going that route. Yeah, I need a Richard Lavoie of Pinot Noir to tell me that it's okay to
He'll
take the. We'll see.
You know what I forgot to ask you? What the ink grade? What are they in? Neutral, or do you oak
A little
some
bit,
of them?
yeah,
A little?
and it's a side of you're gonna see less prominent oak like you would think of Napa Cap. There's a good chunk of new oak on the ink grade wines, but you're not going to taste or smell oak. You're going to get the tension and what comes from oak. But I've been working with a select number of Coopers for quite a while, and there's about 5 of them that I really like that give me that side.
So
without
it's
the
more
push.
about how much you use and really specifically the type you're using.
For sure.
Working.
Yeah, because I love new oak and what it
Right,
does.
but you want it a certain way.
Yeah, and so yes, you're going to see oak on those, and I think Cabernet Sauvignon definitely can take more oak than a Pinot Noir, for example.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So that's the Pinot. The Chard. Did we talk enough about the Chard?
The Chard, the difference is that comes in, and because I have the acidities out on that property so low naturally. pH, high acid. I'm able to basically press those very long and hard like champagne. So I'm able to get into very brown juice. And the thing about that is that when you start pressing down toward the seeds, you really start to get into a level of antioxidants that aren't available in that fleshy outer side. And so those lees and solids that come out of it are what are able to make this wine be so solid throughout its life and not need to see sulfur. But they'll be in concrete egg for about 9 months, and then they shift over to Demi-Muit again for the rest of it, but also about 2 years élevage altogether before they get bottled.
And then you make, is it a Pinot Noir? Cuvée
Cuvée
Kayla?
Kayla, it's a Pinot.
That's a Pinot Noir. Kayla, short for Michaela, named after your wife.
Yeah.
You're a good boy to keep her happy. It's easier to do that than
well
not.
stated.
So why do you call it a cuvee? I mean, what's going on with that wine?
Well, so 2 things. One, I made the decision at the very beginning with the first Pinot and the first Chard. We hand paint every bottle, my family and I.
I was going to get to that, but it's kind of an interesting thing.
It is, but it's
I mean,
also
it
a
works
side of,
so well, but Jesus, what a pain
well, it
in
was
the
a great
ass.
idea year 1, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those where I've learned that like I don't want to make more than 100 cases of these 2 wines because painting them is a pain in.
Did you get like apprentices to help you now?
Well, child labor is
Okay.
wonderful, but yeah, I have some help, and we get through it. But it's also
The
a side.
consistency is pretty cool. I mean, I've looked at different pictures. I mean, I understand it's a hand painted thing,
Yeah.
and it's a very, I don't think rough is the right word, but it's this cool art. But it doesn't look like one's here and one's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty good.
Well, I had a love affair, if you will, with what Prieuré Roque did in Burgundy,
Yes.
and that kind of it's a big fu
There's
a little bit.
There's
in
kind of
what
a
that is.
cool association.
And
to
I
that.
loved that side of what that was, and I really that kept coming up for me, and paper
funny,
labels did not
that's-
convey it, and so this was that kind of side of conveying it. And then the Cuvée Kayla, what it is you have all of this Pinot on the property, then and specifically one block that shows itself a little bit more gamay. It's a little bit more just kind of red fruited
It's not
fun.
gamay. It's just
It's not. It's a
gamay like.
it's a selection Massal that's how it's manifested itself on this property. And so it doesn't take structure as well. So what I do is I basically take these wines that are going into Cuvée Kayla. I don't put as much structural challenge on them, and I don't need to macerate them as long. So they're going more past dry and then getting pressed soon thereafter. So there's a little bit more primary there. There's all 100% whole cluster, but also a side of being a little bit more approachable early on. Cuvée Kayla is the entry, getting people all buttered up, and then you get into the big structural
Right.
side of it.
But it sounds like, you're pulling grapes from different blocks and types. And
But all property I farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, a little difference in some of the winemaking techniques, just based on that. A lot of people say, "Oh, my cuvee, it's just the younger vines,"
Right.
but it
No.
doesn't sound like that. We talked about the Loire a lot. You and I are big fans. We've been influenced by Pascaline. We've drank a lot of the wines. Talk to me about any idea of expansion within your own property, acquiring more property,
Yeah.
looking towards other varietals, which my guess the first would be Loire varietals.
Yeah.
Where are you at with that?
So I started bringing back that budwood and propagating it, and had some wonderful help from some, the Mascarin family, and I was able to get these mother blocks going. And then ultimately, I had a property there in Occidental, not too far from Komorebi, that I was able to really put all of these Loire varietals at. So you have.
So it's been going.
It's been going. The first 23 is the first bottling. It's just Sauvignon Blanc and Chenin Blanc, with cuttings from
Blended or separates?
separate. But they both have a little Romorantin blended into them. And then next year, you're going to start getting into like a Pinot Denis, a Gamay.
Wait, you planted Pinot Denis?
Oh, yeah. There's 3 selections
my
out
favorite
there.
grape.
Oh, it's incredible.
I love that grape.
And so you have Benoit Courreul gave me some Clos Roche Blanche, 140-year-old Pinot Denis, and Eric Nicolas from Domaine de Belleviere, 3 Pinot Denis selections out there.
But here's my problem. This all sounds like a tease. I mean, you're the right guy in the right place, and you know where you. But there's just not going to be a lot of this stuff,
No.
So back to my original point. Not that you want to get bigger, or
Yeah.
you don't even want to paint any more bottles of that. If you can and it's feasible, I mean, don't you want to make more wine, or that's tough to get there?
No, I don't. But I think one of the great things is that maybe breaking down a barrier or providing something that somebody else wasn't able to do on their own, and providing that will allow somebody else to maybe take them
You
and
know what?
push them a little bit further.
That's a good cause or idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's worth the time.
The goal
The
on this,
inspiration to someone else that
Yeah.
commits to a bigger,
Yeah.
I think that's great.
yeah,
You've had the opportunity, or you are having the opportunity to work at 2 distinct vineyards. I
Yeah.
mean, really, your project and Incgrade. I'm curious, how do you juggle your time? I mean, is Incgrade the 9 to 5, and you're side hustling? Not exactly, but how do you do that?
well,
Carlton's not listening, so you could tell me you don't spend that much time.
Hi, Carlton. So one of the things that comes up, I mean, from a winemaking side, one of the blessings and one of the sides of doing Incgrade in the first place was that there was a facility that I was able to make all of Incgrade and my wines at together. So the team that I work with were able to make all of these wines under one roof. And that's a huge benefit to me because prior I was, either custom crushing it or doing it in these little
you were-
facilities.
It seems like a bit of a schlep to get your Sonoma grapes to the Incgrade
That's
winery.
the least of my concerns, because
Right.
at that point it's like I'm picking at
It's
night,
logistics.
and it's in the dark, and I'm over there in an hour, and they're dropped
So
off.
currently, Matt Taylor wines are made at Incgrade. Incgrade's made at Incgrade.
And Incgrade's made in Incgrade, but the big thing is the farming side, right? So for me, I have a side of I'm jumping out there in the evenings. Fridays usually are a day that I'm Monday through Thursday on the Napa side. Friday through Sunday I'm coastal, and Sunday's usually all family day. But Friday, evenings if I need to, and then usually I'm jumping in with help on Fridays and Saturdays to do what I need to do.
Any plans or ideas of a winery in Sonoma, or not necessarily, or it's money you don't want to spend?
No, I think that, I mean, again, I
I mean, with your output, you don't need anything too huge.
no, and I again, and it's could be where I'm at today and what it is, but I'm really blessed to have this partnership that I have with Carlton and doing this, and I feel like I'm getting to work with this vineyard in Napa and express 2 parts of the world in lights that need to be shown. And so the ability to keep doing that, it's like, yes, I'm my family and I, we live in Sonoma County. I'm never moving to Napa County, but I get the side of being a visitor every day and then going over back into Sonoma County. Sorry,
Right.
Napa, but I'm
I
a
get
Sonoma
that.
County kid.
It seems like you've been a student of, wine regions, winemakers. You've been influenced. We talked about a lot of people with Incgrade and with, your own wines. Have you learned something from one thing that directly applies to the other? Because the answer is you're always going to learn stuff and apply. But I'm
100%.
talking specifics. You're running back and forth.
Yeah.
It's like, did something happen, at Ink Grade where you go, this makes total sense to do here? Or it's two different types of things?
Always learning something. I'll have to come back to you on exact specifics
Yeah,
because there's been
learning,
a
I
lot of them.
understand.
I'm
I'm
trying to
talking
think
about implementing. Is there anything? But you could
Yeah.
come back to me on that.
Yeah.
So I had Carlton on less than a month ago. You've been working with him. It's like 5-7 years now, right?
Yeah.
The Ink Grade thing. To me, it seems like a bigger than an independent winery, but not a big company. But it seems like they're very committed to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've kind of bared that out, where the wine, the message is what's best, not here's how we want you to make wine.
Right.
And I don't think you would still be there if, that was the thing.
No, I also, and I spoke to somebody about this yesterday, is that I also, and I'm not trying to, and I told him this exact same thing the other day, I'm not trying to toot his horn, but I also probably wouldn't be there if Carlton wasn't there. I've never met a CEO and a person that hustles as much around the world to get exposure and get these wines seen.
It's unique.
It's
unique.
unique.
I like him as my point guy,
Yeah.
and you do too.
And I do, and it's one of those where I don't need to be the focal point, and yet at the same time, it's
But your wines
most
are
companies,
the focal point.
yeah. But most companies, they're gonna live and die by an old model, and he is not subscribed to that, and the world needs that. And so like I said, I'm out in the market because Carlton and Ink Grade has pushed me to be out here more. Otherwise, I would have stayed at home farming and being in the winery, and you might not ever see these wines.
Well, there's good reason for all of that, because Ink Grade is a bit of a gem.
Yeah.
And why should it be unknown or hidden or just accessible to the people who figured it out? So
Yeah.
it's well worth your time
Yeah.
to do that. And it's a validation of your efforts. So
Thank
stop complaining. All right. Anything keeping you up at night these days? Normal stuff?
Plenty.
Or
I have 3 kids, and
separate. Well, kids keep you up literally, like they're
Right.
can't sleep
Yeah.
or they're crying or whatever. But any life stuff? Like I
I'm
know you worry
blessed.
about the
Yeah.
kids,
blessed, very blessed.
So that's
in
good.
the area that we're in
Good.
and where we're at, very blessed.
Good. All right. So we're going to do 2 more things. We're going to do the wine list. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and then we're going to taste and evaluate, which, if you want to pour it out, the Pinot Noir. All right, so the wine list is 5 questions. We've done this almost 300 times. It's the same 5 questions. I post them. People sit there and go, wow, this guy's kind of happening. He knows what he's doing. Let's see what he's drinking or thinking,
Oh, no. Should I have studied for this?
No, spontaneous and don't dwell. 'Cause
Okay.
We're running out of time. So the first question is, what are you drinking now? And that's in the context of what's in your fridge, what's off the side from business.
Yeah.
What do you like? It could be as simple as beer, or you're a Riesling. What are you drinking now?
Honestly, I'm drinking. I love crisp, acidic whites. I drink whites, and I'm
falls there?
talking in the side of Muscadet, Chablis, Sancerre, things that just.
So no hoity-toity, French, all the.
No, I can't afford those wines.
I think
so
Muscadet is one of the greatest wine values.
Oh my god!
And it's not hard to find the
100%.
right guys. The Lapierre's.
Landron, Papier.
Pepier, I mean.
Yeah.
All right. So, crisp, high acidity whites, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said Pepier, Landron, because, I like to mention.
Yeah.
All right. That's question number 1. Question number 2 may be the goofiest, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Your favorite wine and food pairing. Not what you and I think pairs well with this, but what do you like? It's not something you're going to eat every week, month, even if.
Yeah.
What's that ooh-ah?
You know what? And what I'll say with that is that being a free diver and spearfishing, there's a couple of unique things. One, abalone when we could get it, but the other one is that uni. And I'm a big I'm pretty spoiled on uni in the side of like, and I get this because my kids won't eat uni, but when I bring it right out of the ocean and I cut it open, they love uni because it doesn't carry as much brininess at the time. It's really fresh and amazing. And so uni and that time frame when I can get people out there on the coast and having uni or let's say abalone with some muscadet, like that pairing, like they're
Classic.
sold. I've hooked them for life.
You know, we have a Grape Nation rule that you can answer that question, but you can't say oysters and muscadet because it's so
okay.
obvious. Or
So-
champagne.
So
and
uni
or-
and muscadet worked. Okay.
it works perfectly.
Okay.
I have a curiosity because you've been doing this since you're a kid.
Yeah.
Doesn't Santa Barbara have famous great uni in that area?
Santa Barbara does, and there's a wonderful, I forgot, why am I blanking on her name? A wonderful woman that dives and does a ton of uni harvesting. A big difference is that it is really difficult and treacherous up along our coast to
Well, I was
grab
going to
uni.
ask. There's uni by you. There's good uni.
Yeah.
But ain't easy to get.
It is not, and
Okay.
so and the uni that we're getting is tough to get, tougher to get, and it's also a side of it is just when you pull it right out of the water, it's amazing.
Sounds cool.
Yeah.
So muscadet and uni.
Yeah.
And when you said your kids like it out of the ocean,
Yeah.
is that because, you know, once you package it, and this stuff's very lightly packaged and
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
is it because it sits in the juice that has a little salinity and maybe, you know,
It does. It just takes on and so there's certain unis that I'll get that have been packaged that I feel they've done a good job. They figured out how to conserve freshness, but there's a lot that you'll get that just, to me, it does not. And people geek out on it, but I don't geek out when it gets to that flavor
well, you've been
profile.
around it.
Yeah,
you know,
and
for a
so
long time.
there's nothing like it fresh.
As luxurious as it is, it's been in front of you. You've
Yeah.
been with it, and you know it could be plentiful when you want it to be. All right, so that's a good one. All right. Initially, you told me, you know, you're working hard in the vineyards and the cellar and all that, but you're doing a little traveling now. I ask everyone, tell me your favorite wine restaurant and or bar. And I sort of should preface it. I'm not asking for your top 3 list
Yeah.
because I don't want you to leave someone out. And some says, how come you didn't mention it? I just threw a few names out of it. Can you name a few places locally or in your travels? Like,
Yeah.
I'll break the ice. I think Chambers and Pascaline Lepeltier checks every box that I ask this question.
100%.
Selection, vibe, environment, food,
100%.
people.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Give me some other.
I mean, we're in New
Restaurants,
York,
bars.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm. It's one of those where I would have put Chambers right there. And again, I talk about what Ariel and Kenneth are doing and the side
Yes.
of their lists and
Yes.
what like Air Champagne Bar,
They've always had an eye
Roscioli,
towards.
those lists and what they're doing food wise is phenomenal. We can go back out to the coast. And
Give me a couple things on the coast. I
Yeah,
mean,
there's
Sebastopol or
So there's a great little wine bar in Sebastopol in the Barlow. There's also another one that is down in Mill Valley that opened up that Fabian's running. And God, I'm gonna blank on the name right now. But it's in this
text
old
you
it is
by the
and
time I post it.
it's one of those where you just don't see like coming to Chambers, the selection that you guys get out here. There's Napa and Sonoma don't really have as deep a selection.
No.
Let's say there's some great places, but this place down in Mill Valley and this little place in Sebastopol are so delivering on what I think of as liquid mentors that I really want to be grabbing and trying with people. They're pretty dialed in.
You know, I've had Pax Maley on. He's kind of created this community, you know, where he lets other people make wine and mentor them. I mean, that's not far from you. I mean, there's a Jasmine Hirsch. I mean, there's a lot of different styles and a lot of good people doing stuff out there.
Yeah.
It's really kind of a hotbed right now
Yeah.
for well thought out wines. You know,
Yeah.
people who are committed
Yeah.
to make. Now, you may not like this style as much as the other.
Yeah.
But, all right. So you gave me restaurants, bars in your travels and at home. All right. 4th question. And you're going to have to pour me more of that because that's not enough. Because I took a taste and I'm not spitting and I'm hammering. Because if you're going to drink and drive, this is the type of stuff you drink. Okay.
Amazing.
All right. So, fourth question, favorite all-time wine. The initial intent of that question was, you're in the business. You know, you have friends that are wine people. You travel. What's the most expensive rare wine you ever tasted? Don't care. What's that wine that to this day is so important to you, that changed the way you thought about it, that you still could think about when you tasted it? And sometimes people answered it was a crappy champagne, but I proposed to my wife.
Yeah.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
But what are influencers when it mattered then, wine-wise?
I started off the episode with that, and that's that side of Fino Sherry Manzanilla. And the reason being is that when you get into these Chardonnays and these Pinots, there's a side of savory in all of them and a side of saltiness and a side of salinity that's in all these wines, and even Ink Grade as where they're going and what they are. And so for me, that oxidative side, what that taught me or what it pushed in me has always been there, and it's just a huge barometer of everything I do. And so that for me, and the food style over there of just like seafood and that side of fried
So
seafood
sherry
or whatever it is,
from the region,
Manzanilla specifically,
Manzanilla
Fino or
with
Manzanilla. Yeah.
certain seafoods.
Oh my God, all seafoods. Yeah.
So you were at Chambers. I mentioned that earlier. You did a presentation of your wines here.
Yeah.
And it was available to the public. It's just not a lot of people. So if you could have gotten here, you could. But you told me Eric Asimov was here.
Yeah.
Now, Eric is like a huge sherry. Like he talks about that a lot.
I don't know that we've talked deeply about it yet.
I'm telling you, because it didn't come up. If you Google him and his writings, you'll see that. He even drinks it on the side. All right, so we got that. That makes a lot of sense. And what's even more soulful about that answer is the influence that it had on
100%.
Imagine if you wound up going to like Tuscany and you were influenced, you'd be making these big over the top Pinots. So thank God for that. Right?
Thank God for that.
You don't think of that, right? All right. So you're this, whenever I ask people questions like, oh, you're the perfect guy to answer this or not, you're exactly not the perfect guy to answer this.
Yeah.
So this is going to be hard because you make well-made wines that deserve the pricing they get. You don't make a lot. There's a lot of time. But this question I always, I've asked this. Recommend to me the best wine you could recommend between 15, 20, 22 bucks. A red and a white. Okay. And I selfishly put that question in because my kids are like in their 30s and they can't go to a dinner with a crappy supermarket wine, but they can't afford like 50, 60 every time. So how do you wow? Now, in a way, you answered it.
We already answered that for white,
right?
Yeah.
A Clisson, even if you want to spend a couple. So we'll start on the whites with Muscadet from Good Makers, but you got to give me more whites and you got to do the reds.
Oh no. Okay. Well, white. We're gonna start with Muscadet, Landron, Pepier. Muscadet is something that's always going to be at our table and what we're gonna show. Two. If we're going to jump in there, Carlton jumped on it already. I'm not going to repeat that side of Village Chablis. But then for me, Sancerre, like
he did the La Chablienne, even his own stuff. I said, I don't care if you plug your own stuff.
And then there's some amazing, Grenache Blancs. There's some amazing whites coming out of Spain that are lower priced that you can find that are really beautiful. And I'm not just talking Alvarinho because Alvarinho's aside, whether it's Portuguese or Vinho Verde are coming down, but those can also be wonderful on that acidic vein. Whatever it is, you're finding me on that side of acidic whites, and typically you can find those around the world.
All
for
right,
a great
so those
price.
are the whites. It tends to be that the reds are tougher to recommend because of price. But can you think of some great value reds that fall into the same category?
Well, it started off with my biggest mentor in my career and the side of what is still unbelievably priced as one of the most valuable reds that you can find, Marietta Old Vine Red. That wine, Zinfandel based out of California.
And it's in that.
It's under $20. And
wow.
It is just still, I think, one
so
of the
that's
best
like a no-brainer,
values.
obvious
no-brainer.
to you.
And it'll be on our table. It's one of those ones that I can always put on the table, and people that aren't necessarily comfortable with wine or don't drink wine all the time or like wine but don't give them something fancy, let's say, they get a little nervous.
Right.
You put Old Vine, and they all love Old Vine Red. It pleases everybody.
That's a good one. Nobody's ever brought that one up. Discovery is part of why I do this. Wow, that wine, the price is incredible. This guy kind of knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I say kind of. That was kind of a slur. He knows what he's talking about.
Kind
so
of,
that's
for
why
sure.
we do that. And I did mention we do post these answers. So good job on that.
Thank you.
Okay, very good job. All right, we end the show with a segment called the Weekly Wine Sip, where I would be crazy not to sit with a winemaker and not sit with him and taste and evaluate the wines and let you talk about them.
Yeah.
We spent some time on Ink Grade. I think we covered, as much as we could or should on that. Now I want to kind of finish this show and do a discussion of the Matt Taylor wines, the Komarebi Pinot Noir, right?
Yeah.
So tell me vintage and then get specifics, into this.
Well, we talked a little bit about the Pinot when it comes in and that side of, building it structurally and such. And 2017 was a vintage where 2017 and 2020 were two vintages where there was a big heat spike, at kind of end of July,
Late?
Early.
Not
Yeah,
at the end,
before
in the middle
harvest.
early.
Yeah, and there's something that something happens in the skins when that occurs that allows phenolics, and I say the grapes, they vomit phenolics. It's just a side of
Is that a benefit to you?
well, it's different.
Okay.
And they come out so easily. And 17 was one of those vintages where they come in, I do that body tread and I put that Pied de Couve in and I wet the cap. And basically I didn't do a single punch down the entire harvest.
Wow.
And typically, there's a phase in that fermentation where there's a quality of foam, there's a metabolism of the phenolics, and you're doing potentially 3, 4, 5 punch downs a day in that time frame. And how you're getting structure out is unique. And this vintage was one of those where I didn't do a single punch down. It was a cap wetting every morning. And there
Because
was
of the
so
effect
much
of that heat spike in July,
that
and
was
like
coming
you
out.
literally said, vomiting.
Yeah, and so it did this every single day. It just gave phenol, and it was one of those I couldn't add to what was already there because it was already so stuffed. But with that, it moved so much quicker throughout its digestion or polishing or polymerization of those phenol, whatever you want to call it, and it basically had a less maceration time. So this vintage for me was a total anomaly. It's still very consistent with all the other Pinots and what they are from an aromatic and from a structural side. It just was a total different way to get there. And if I was younger and in a recipe cookie cutter way of doing things, I wouldn't have done that, and I would have built these up to where they need. I wouldn't even be releasing this wine.
So what I'm curious about is, how do you physiologically know? Like, there's a heat spike early, it's going to do something. How do you know exactly that's what's going on? I mean, that's pretty descriptive. They're vomiting.
Yeah.
Phenolics or whatever you said. Do you know from studying that that's going to happen? Is it a visual
No, it was the first
identification,
time.
or do you bite it? And I mean, how do you know all this?
Well, every single day, multiple times a day, you're tasting the fermentations and you're seeing where they're going to determine how you're going to extract and move with that wine that day. And for me, it was a side of every single day, the amount of tannin and phenolics that were coming out of these was basically saying, do not touch me, stay away from me. Number one. Number two was a side of, as these were starting and going, there was another fermentation that was ending, and pressing that off and seeing how those had moved through and where they had gone phenolically. The decision on these was basically made to do them and proceed down a path that I was uncomfortable with, but the vintage was calling for that.
It dictated this is how you have to
so
do
being
it.
open to the signs and in the winery, and not just being cookie cutter.
Anything you had to do different in the cellar, and I'm not talking additives or whatever, but just how you did it.
Just that.
Just that out there.
Yeah.
17 after that heat spike early on, pretty normal, or
Yeah, it came in, but it was, again, that spike. And in 20, we had the same thing. I had to do a very similar thing in 20, slightly different, but it was also a side of it vomited phenolics.
I love that term, vomited phenolics. I may have T-shirts made. The Grape Nation slogan.
Send me
is-
one when you do.
The Grape Nation slogan is "We bring wine to the people," but I think secondary may be vomiting phenolics. If you know, you know. With maybe
There you go.
All right, so let's do a quick evaluation.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't need to stroke you because I have a lot of guests and I taste a lot of wines. Plus, I'm at portfolio tastings and everything. But I mean, this is arguably one of the best Pinots I've tasted in a
Wow.
long time.
Thank you.
And the reason I say that is just stylistically. I mean, the mouthfeel, the nose, um, the palate, the savoriness, the fruit. I mean, it hits every note that I love.
Yeah.
And I went like this. First I thought big Pinots from California, and then I
Yeah.
tasted Burgundy, and they were thin, and then I saw the light with the ripe Burgundy,
Yeah.
and then I saw more restrained. I mean, this seems to hit a lot of. All right, so color. It, to me, it looks like more of a Burgundian color than a California Pinot. Is that accurate?
100%. I think that one thing about Pinot is that if you care about color, you're not making Pinot correctly.
All right, so the color is kind of this classic Burgundian. What's the word that describes this color?
Garnet, maybe?
It's a garnet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's go nose. Get it up to that old schnoz again.
So again, this is for me what I love about whole cluster is that when you get into whole cluster and when they're done right, and this is 100% whole cluster, you're getting into tea notes. You're getting into floral notes like hibiscus and jasmine. You're getting into that side of, again, savory, saltiness.
Those are two different things. The tea note kind of is one thing, and the hibiscus is another. Is one from the stems and one from the seeds or something?
I
Or
think
all
that
from the stem?
well, so again, I think when you taste this wine and again that similarity to Grenache, if you start going down the vein and they're thinking Rayas and thinking what Grenache can do, and where you start to push that, where the ripeness of fruit starts to take it a little bit versus the genetics of Pinot and what those are also lending to the aromatic profile, you start to see this kind of the conversion of the two together,
Right.
really manifesting into this wine. So for me, this is, I think, that expression of California, which I'd love to see more of, which is taking something and a new chapter of what these wines can be and what they maybe.
That's
could
exactly
show
what's
more of.
happening. So on the nose, what are you getting?
I'm getting that oolong and that jasmine tea, but I'm also getting that hibiscus. I'm getting that
very
little
interesting.
side of a little bit of clove and nutmeg in the background, and I'm just getting it's again that low arc of complexity and nuance versus this big primary jut in your face that is taking center show. It's not that.
Like the red fruits or the
It's all the
berries,
actors
red
on
berry-
age for the bow versus the
I
one
like
person
that.
singing with the spotlight on.
The mouthfeel is very interesting to me because the word works for me, but I don't want it to be. It's kind of a rich mouthfeel.
Yeah.
It's not thin, and it's not like glycerin-y, but it really,
Yeah.
I guess it's mouth coating and feels beautiful.
So one of the wonderful things about whole cluster is that California fruit has a tendency to have a sweetness to it, an inherent sweet, not a sweet from a residual sugar, but there's inherent sweetness from the sunlight and from the sun. And so you get this side of whole cluster really, I think, ties in with that, and it helps carry it across the palate. There's a weight there, but not a heaviness.
Right.
And Bart, I always love that side of weight without heaviness, but there's a side as well from that whole cluster. There's a bitterness on the back end that I love, and we're allergic
But a
to
good
bitterness.
and
100%.
fairly subtle. I mean,
But it
bitterness
ties
is
it
not
in.
a word that's jumping out. Now that you bring it up, that's, to me, savory could be bitter could be
Yeah.
savory and all of that, which is, important.
But it's
to me.
that, and there's that qualité des amers that they talk about in Burgundy, that quality of bitterness, all types of bitterness, but that little bit there that just ties you in and holds you with it is very, very much from that whole cluster and that
So
maceration. side.
stupid question.
Yeah.
Is this a Burgundian style? Or you don't want to be boxed into answering
Well,
and saying, yeah.
I mean, it's easy to put it over there because it's more Burgundian than it is California.
Yes.
That's right.
Leave it at that.
And then I would argue in that path when people are struggling with where to place it. Okay, is it? I would also say that side again, coming back. Also, you see that Grenache face, so it
Right,
totally
which
falls
you said
into a
from the
place of the
beginning.
world. You're like,
And sometimes if you can't figure it out when you're prompted, you go, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you had the pleasure to drink a Reyes or, some of the other guys.
Mm.
Let's finish with the palate. I always ask, does it replicate the nose descriptors or does it bring new things? What do you get on the palate?
again, I love this, and I'm biased, but I love that side of what you started off on, that savory. But again, back to that manzanilla, that salty, that
Yeah.
little bit of umami,
I didn't
that
mention
seaweed
it.
that comes
It's
through.
very
Yeah.
salty. I don't mean that like it's very salty,
Right.
but salty is a
It's not a
prominent
saline
part
mouthwash, but
that
it's in there.
works well with this wine.
Yeah, for
Which
sure.
is that just location? Like you're just not
Location
far from
and
the
lees.
ocean, and it's in the air, and the lees and all.
Yeah.
That. All right, so I go back for the third time. What's a good pairing with this particular wine?
And again, the
Like if
wonderful thing
you
about
had
this,
to lay this out for a meal, you're not wasting a good wine on a crappy meal. So is it as simple as a roast chicken? Can it be as creative as
well, that's where I love Pinot Noir made this way, is that the possibilities
Right.
are endless.
right?
But
Salmon, chicken.
I mean, I would drink this with fish. I would drink this as
Yeah.
well with. I'd put this down when
well,
I'm
let's
doing
make
oysters.
it easy. Right. Let's make it easy. Like besides asparagus and maybe artichoke,
Abalone. There you go.
It wouldn't go well with
It
abalone.
would. No, abalone. Yeah.
But what's like the one or two things that wouldn't go with this? Because that means everything else goes with it.
Everything goes with
Yeah.
this, Sam.
Oh, yeah. All right. So this wine, the 17 Komarebi
Yeah.
Pinot, this is what, the third wine you've made?
This is the second Pinot from the property.
This is it, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Youngster.
Yeah.
And I hate asking this question, but I'm curious. How old are the vines here? Like 6-8 years old?
2011 they were planted.
Oh, so
So yeah, 14 years old almost. Yeah.
over a dozen. That's good. All right, so that's the 2017 Matt Taylor Wines Komarebi Pinot Noir. There is availability on this wine.
Yeah, this is something that right now is current, is what we're actually selling in wholesale market, so restaurants and such.
Right.
And this is what are available at restaurants around the country.
I was going to say,
Um,
restaurants are always a great intro to wines that you don't see, and sometimes they're not available. But so you
And
could
the
you could
future
drink it
of-
whether you could buy it or
Yeah.
you drink it at a restaurant.
I think the future is very much coming back to sommeliers and that side of what was mailing list is it needs to be back in their hands. But
Yeah.
the 19 is what I currently released to my mailing list. 17 is what's in the market right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're both out there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, Matt, we got to wrap up. I got to do a quick wrap up, and then I want to get just some basic info from you. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening or event, hit me up at samatthegrapenation.com. That's samatthegrapenation.com. Listen to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe to the Grape Nation and leave a review if you like the show. If you subscribe, Matt Taylor pops up on your feed without
There
asking.
you go.
But no, you subscribe once, but they'll show up. You can follow us on Instagram, where I said I'll post our wine list answers and weekly wine sip. Instagram at SBenRuby, X at BenRuby. You can always use the hashtag on both the Grape Nation to find us. We're on Facebook at the Grape Nation. Once again, we'll post Matt's wine list and weekly wine sip picks on our social media. Matt, let's try to tie this together. Where can people find more information on Ink Grade, on Matt Taylor Wines? What are the best places? People want two things. They're just curious and want to know more, or they want to know where to buy this.
Yeah.
Where do you go?
Yeah, so inkgrade.com and matttaylorwines.com
Okay.
are the two places to learn more about these projects. And then
Is there
through
commerce
those,
on either one?
and then if you go to Domain, Demeine,
Estates.
DomaineEstates.com, that's the wholesaler for both of these wines.
Demeine.
Correct. Domain.
Estates.com.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the one that'll show you, or that'll give you the where you can find these wines around the country or
Okay.
internationally.
Okay. And that's Domain is part of
Lawrence Wine Estates.
Lawrence Wine Estates. That's their
Wholesale arm.
distribution, wholesale,
Yeah.
importing arm, and all that.
Correct.
Wines that they own, and they bring in
Import,
other stuff
yeah.
too, which is kind of cool.
Very much.
What about social media? Is there social media exposure for Ink Grade or Matt Taylor Wines on their own?
Matt Taylor Wines and Ink Grade both have their own social media, and mine is O2 in Wine, like oxygen.
Wait, slow down. O2.
O2 in Wine.
Okay.
Oxygen in Wine.
Wise guy. All right, that's it for us, Matt. I want to thank our guest, Matt Taylor. One of the reasons I asked you to sit down with me is when you sit down and do other podcasts and you ask people different things, whether it's the wine list or questions, and your name pops up every now and then, and you really didn't know much about it, it draws attention to what is this. And then when you look into things and realize, this is a very cool guy and his passion and, the end product, is unbelievable. I reached out to you and I thank you for sitting down with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Van Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
I know. You're constantly making choices about your food, what you eat, what you avoid, where you get it, and how you factor in all the noise about what's right. But I think you're missing something really critical about how the food on your plate is deeply connected to everything you care about: your health, the community, the environment, and the economy. I'm Dana DePrima, founder of the Four Farmers Movement and host of the One Bite is Everything podcast, now proudly a part of Heritage Radio Network. Here we are reconnecting the dots, revealing the hidden forces behind our food system and why it matters more than ever. Each week, we uncover the real impact of what's on your plate, who controls it, what's at stake, and what you can do about it. Because food is more than just what you eat. It's quite literally connected to everything you care about. New episodes drop every Thursday. Subscribe to One Bite is Everything and take your seat at the table.